Hello, everybody. My name is Yelena Vermillion, and I'm the Executive Director of the Sex Workers Action Program, also known as SWAP, Hamilton. I'm here to talk to you today for the Transgender Day of Remembrance, mostly from the perspective of sex workers and for sex workers. Before I start, I wanted to do a land acknowledgement for the City of Hamilton. This is taken from the Hamilton Community Legal Clinic's website. The City of Hamilton is situated upon the traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas. This land is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which was an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe to share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. We further acknowledge that this land is covered by the Between the Lakes Purchase of 1792 between the Crown and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Today, the City of Hamilton is home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. And we recognize that we must do more to learn about the rich history of this land so that we can better understand our roles as residents, neighbors, partners, and caretakers. SWAP Hamilton stands in solidarity with murdered and missing Indigenous women, girls, transgender and two-spirit people, including sex workers. So I wanted to start off a bit of some sobering data. I received this data from the link that you'll see on the screen here. According to data gathered by Transrespect versus Transphobia Worldwide, also known as TVT, a research arm of the advocacy network Transgender Europe, at least 350 transgender and gender diverse people were murdered between the beginning of October 2019 and the end of September 2020, the period evaluated annually through the Trans Murder Monitoring Project. This total represents a 6% increase in reported murders from their count in 2019, when 331 trans and gender nonconforming people lost their lives due to hate violence. As a consequence of the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as growing racism and police brutality, the lives of trans and gender diverse people are at even greater risk, the organization said in a press release. Data is a testimony of how COVID-19 is disproportionately impacting trans people worldwide, especially those most marginalized, such as Black and women of color, sex workers, migrants, youth, and the poor. T versus T analysis shows that 98% of those murdered globally were trans women or trans feminine people, such as myself. However, adversely, in addition, people of color made up 79% of trans people murdered in the United States during the time frame that they researched. When examined globally, 38% of the murders occurred in the streets, while 22% of the incidents took place in a victim's home. The average age of those who were killed is 31 years old, with the youngest victim being 15 years old. I'm 27 and I worry. I'm white, but it's very much sobering to hear these kinds of statistics and understand that as a group of people, we're being targeted every day by policy and legislation and by society. Moving on, I am a consultant. I am a part of the Priority Population Consultation team for TransPulse Canada's research on trans and non-binary sex workers in Canada, and trans and non-binary people more broadly. So I will be speaking and revealing some new data today that they have calculated. So before that, I just wanted to say this next quote is from a document that Pace Society put together, which is a nonprofit in Vancouver, which serves sex workers in the downtown east side. Sex workers and trans people of all genders face alarmingly high rates of discrimination and violence that cannot be divorced from the propagation of cis-centric and anti-sex work ideas. Due to criminalization, sex workers lack the legal rights and protections afforded to other workers, including access to unions and strong labor laws, safety in police interactions, and freedom from stigma and violence. That 62% of the documented murders of trans women worldwide whose profession was known in 2017 were sex workers further illustrates how sex workers and trans women are needlessly exposed to lethal violence on account of stigma and criminalization. As noted by the Coalition Against Trans Antagonism, also known as CATA, trans women are women and sex work is real work. The denial, blatant disregard, and willful ignorance to either of these important realities is to be complicit in the violence that harms sex workers and trans women, and additionally non-binary people and gender diverse people. Most of the trans women murdered each year are Black women and women of color. This is really important to highlight. The intersections of identities can be a death sentence. So for the most recent TransPulse Canada data, over a 10-week period in 2019, the TransPulse Canada research team collected survey data from 2,873 trans and non-binary people. This report represents results from the first national data on health and well-being among trans and non-binary sex workers. So here's some of the statistics. Transgender and non-binary people appear more likely than cisgender people to do sex work. A previous study estimated that 14% of trans people in Ontario had never done sex work, and 3% were current sex workers. I hope I said that right. 14% of trans people in Ontario had ever done sex work, and 3% were current sex workers. Mistakes are okay, folks. Trans-specific reasons for doing sex work may include employment discrimination, housing insecurity, the need to fund gender-affirming care, and benefits including access to community and affirmation of gender identity. Much existing research on trans sex workers focuses on HIV risk, but has also identified other important health concerns and social determinants of health, including high levels of violence, limited access to justice, and stigma in healthcare settings. The health of sex workers in Canada is shaped by the criminalization of sex work. In 2013, the Supreme Court struck down Canada's previous sex work criminalization laws as unconstitutional. In response, in 2014, the Harper government passed legislation which criminalizes sex workers' clients. Sex workers' rights organizations opposed this legislation, and recent studies indicate it has negatively impacted health and safety among marginalized sex workers. Despite these important policy changes, Canadian research on trans and non-binary sex workers is limited, and research inclusive of trans men and non-binary sex workers is scarce globally. This report provides the first quantitative nationwide profile on the health and well-being of trans and non-binary sex workers in Canada. Just repeating that. Pertinent data. Sex workers were more likely to be racialized. 19% of sex workers versus trans and non-binary people who were not sex workers. Sex workers were more likely than non-sex workers to identify as disabled, a difference of 28% versus 19%. 72% of sex workers versus 54% of non-sex workers self-rated fair or poor mental health, and 63% of sex workers versus 44% of non-sex workers experienced unmet healthcare needs in the past year. The majority of sex workers experienced verbal and sexual assault in the past 5 years. The majority of sex workers, 84%, anticipate police's harassment, and 87 to 96% of sex workers did not anticipate the fair treatment from police and the legal system if physically or sexually assaulted. Conclusion from this data would be that transgender sex workers experienced relatively low socioeconomic status, a high rate of harassment and violence, and experienced more stigma and discrimination in employment, housing, legal aid, and healthcare settings. Although having a high need for gender-affirming healthcare needs, transgender sex workers experienced a higher rate of denial by healthcare providers. As a result, they are less likely to access health care services, had a high rate of unmet healthcare needs, and had a poorer mental and physical health than transgender non-sex workers. That is the data I have from Canada TransPulse to share with you. Just shifting the lens a little bit, I want to go back to in history and just make a reflection. This is from a document that the Canadian Alliance for Sex Work Law Reform compiled in regards to the missing and murdered Indigenous women's inquiry. And this is an excerpt from them. And I just wanted to sort of say this as a sort of a segue, because it illustrates an important point about research. So again, this is a quote from a document from the Canadian Alliance for Sex Work Law Reform. In order to participate, Indigenous women who currently sell or trade sex require a process that accounts for their privacy needs, such as the protection of their identity. Because of disproportionate surveillance, criminalization, consequent stigma, and disdain for women who sell sex, anonymity is primordial for the participation. On September 21st, 2012, the Supreme Court of Canada recognized the fundamental need of anonymity for criminalized communities. In Sex Workers United Against Violence, also known as SWUAV versus Canada, a collective predominantly made of Indigenous women who currently sell sex in the downtown east side of Vancouver, received legal standing to challenge the prostitution provisions as a group rather than as individuals. Specifically, the Supreme Court acknowledged that no individual of SWUAV could challenge the provisions alone, and recognized organizational representation because members of SWUAV feared loss of privacy and safety and increased violence by clients. Also, their spouses, friends, and family members and/or members of their community may not know that they are or were involved in sex work, or that they are or were drug users. They have children that they fear will be removed from child protection authorities. Finally, bringing such challenge they fear may limit their current or future education or employment opportunities. So again, criminalization, social stigma, transphobia, racism, police harassment and brutality, surveillance. These are all intersecting factors that affect trans and non-binary people, especially Black, Indigenous, Asian, and otherwise racialized transgender and non-binary people. And it's really important to understand that a lot of the times we don't receive justice in the same way that a white cisgender male might. I would like to segue to a quote from researcher Cecilia Benoit. I'm going to just play a small clip. And she says,
my research as a sociologist show that it's quite difficult to change behaviors, even if people really wanted to, unless we give them access to key resources in society, and that the change has to be an improvement or give them improve their situation that they're in. So telling people to exit sex work when the other jobs that are available in society actually will make them poorer is not a very good recommendation, nor is it telling people that they should stop doing a particular behavior when the whole context of their lives makes it very difficult.
Thank you, Cecilia Benoit. Dr. Cecilia Benoit is a researcher from the University of Victoria. I've had the pleasure of meeting her, and she's a very kind, generous, wise woman, and the research I believe that she's done is very important for the sex workers' rights movement. So thank you, Cecilia. Really important and astute observation that in a limited choice of options, people may choose sex work as a form of survival because it's a better choice among a range of poor choices. I have one more quote from Nina Arsenault from the episode 3, entitled Letting Go, from Tell It Like It Is, that used to be broadcasted on the W Network. I'll play a clip in a moment, but I just sort of wanted to explain why I'm using her quote. So I gave you sort of like the academic run through of what I'm representing here today for TDOR. And I think also what I'd like to talk about is, sorry, I'm just turning the vibration off on my phone. It's distracting me. I think also what I'd like to talk about is some personal anecdotes beyond just like, let me throw some data at you and like, a collection of pertinent information. I have struggled with housing issues. I've been homeless, I've been incarcerated, I've been, you know, I know what it's like to be a low income person. And I think also, you know, I know what it's like to live with disabilities. And I think that and I am tall and I'm white and I'm thin and I experience many privileges, and I acknowledge this, and it's a tool that can be used for good. And I think, you know, even I have faced a lot of struggles with relative privilege. I currently have a partner, but I have struggled in finding partners. And I think that, you know, some of the basic, what I might consider mundane and fundamental, I hope those two words don't contradict each other exactly, but I consider access to family, communities, and you know, if one wants one, ultimately a partner, that those should be normal things, that we should have access to those things freely. But trans people are often ostracized and vilified and thought of as disgusting and grotesque, and are treated very poorly in society, and we don't often give them the same chances. So this quote from Nina Arsenault, very brief. I wanted to illustrate sort of when I was a young trans woman starting transition, and like the fears that I had about my future and my life and the potential. Here it is. Here's the clip.
His girlfriend was a transsexual, which to me was a mind blow again, because like at that point in my life, I didn't even think transsexuals had boyfriends.
At that point in my life, I didn't even think transsexuals had boyfriends or partners or whomever, right? So this concept that we've been treated so alienated, we've become so alienated and been alienated by society because of discrimination and because of harassment and hatred, that often many of us can't even imagine good and hope for our own lives. Many of us can't imagine living past 30 or 25. I would just like to take a moment to say that all trans and non-binary and gender diverse people deserve love and support and community. And from the bottom of my heart, I want all of you to get that. And you deserve it. And I think that's something that is not often talked about in the trans and non-binary community, is how often access to relationships can be such a fundamental and basic, right? Like, you should be able to have community. And yeah, that's just something that I'd like to focus on. And, you know, a trans activist that I really admire, Kai Cheng Tong, author of oh goodness, I think it's I Hope We Choose Love. You know, talking about like cancel culture and like ultimately like it's messy. Life is messy, and I think that trans and non-binary people have been targeted and persecuted for so long that often there's a lot of infighting between us and conflict that is construed as abuse, when maybe it's just incompatibility in friendship or in community. And you know, I see a lot of hurt in our community that is perpetuated not just by other people as well outside of our community. And that's just a reflection I have. I don't have any wisdom about it other than we need to take heart, I think, and we need to try and slow things down and have patience and learn with each other. I believe that is all I have to say in regards to TDR today. I would like us to, again, reflect on the fact that over 350 trans and non-binary people have been murdered in the last year. And also, the majority of those murders were women of color or Black women. And also, again, 62% of the documented murders of trans women worldwide whose profession was known in 2017 were sex workers. Decriminalize sex work, including removing the parts in the immigration and refugee protection regulations which bar people without status as a citizen or PR, permanent resident in Canada, to work as sex workers. It makes them liable to deportation if they do sex work in Canada. In fact, I think almost every work permit that is provided to a worker in Canada says in red ink on it that it cannot be used for sex work, in so many words. I was told that I would be able to make a call out just for any resources in the event that whoever sees this video knows people that would like to provide pro bono labor, things like this. So if anybody has any lawyers that are interested in providing pro bono labor in the areas of labor or housing, get in contact with us, please. We might have some service users who need some help and some advocacy. Trying to think what else that I might need to ask before I stop this recording without letting the air go dead. Here, I'll put on this. This is my thinking cap. No, I think that's good. Just remember that sex work is work. Trans women are women. Trans women are real women. Trans women can have penises. Intersex people are real. And I am honored to be given the opportunity to speak to you again this year. And I hope that I've done it justice. I was truthfully very nervous about this video, and I'm just letting the little mistakes that I've made in this video go. I'm being fully transparent with y'all about how I feel. And thank you for your grace. And again, hold each other close and have heart as much as you can. And take care. Bye.